Good evening. I'm Candy Hook. Diane Sawyer has the night off. Reefer, Mary Jane, Kind Bud, Ganja. These are just some of the ways we have heard reference to marijuana. This little plant has been around since the dawn of man, but what do we know about it? And what are the legalities concerning it? Tonight we're going to take a look at the facts concerning marijuana and talk to some experts to find out the answers. Let's take a look at some facts. Marijuana contains a psychoactive component known as THC, which produces a pleasurable sensation in the brain due to its release of exogenous opioids and dopamine. When smoked or inhaled, it only takes a few minutes to reach the brain and give the smoker a high feeling. Marijuana can also be eaten, although ingesting the drug this way prolongs the process up to an hour. Physiologic effects of marijuana include memory loss, difficulties with concentration and coordination, as well as respiratory disorders such as bronchitis, asthma, and increased risk for lung cancer. But what about marijuana for medical use? Well, to find out some answers to our questions, we visited a local doctor. We are here on location with Dr. Velting. Dr. Velting has agreed to meet with us today to help us to understand a little bit more about marijuana and how it works. Dr. Velting, thank you for meeting with us today.
It is a pleasure. I am so glad you asked me, Mrs. Sawyer.
So tell me, Dr. Velting, what is marijuana?
Marijuana is a derivative of the cannabis stevia plant. The greatest effect as it gets is from the flowering tops.
So tell us, how does it work?
It works by having an oily substance called delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, THC for short, from the plant activate specific cannabinoid receptors in the brain.
So what are the psychoactive and physiological effects it causes?
Well, the psychoactive effects are the overall pleasurable sensation related to the release of endogenous opioids and then the dopamine. The physiological effects are dose-related and can cause an increase in heart rate and bronchodilation short-term. Chronic long-term use can lead to airway constriction, bronchitis, sinusitis, and respiratory cancer.
So how does it affect the pregnant or nursing mom?
Well, marijuana crosses the placental barrier and is spread to the fetus. The spread causes an increased risk of abnormalities in the CNS, including low birth weight, decreased length, smaller head circumference, and even fetal death. Nursing becomes almost impossible related to the suppression of follicle-stimulating, luteinizing, and prolactin hormones.
That's interesting. So you've told us how it affects the pregnant or nursing mom. So tell me, does it affect the male reproductive system?
It sure does, Candy. Yes, in males there is a decrease in spermogenuous and testosterone levels.
So doctor, why do you think there is such controversy surrounding medical marijuana usage today?
Well, I think marijuana does have a negative reputation because people have and will continue to abuse it. But for medical purposes, marijuana is proving to be most helpful.
Doctor, tell us, what diseases is marijuana seeming to help?
Well, Candy, there are over 250 diseases marijuana is proven to help. Everything from neuropathic pain, nausea, muscle spasms, and glaucoma. It's also a powerful appetite stimulant, especially from those suffering from AIDS. So, as you can see, there are negative and positive, which make marijuana so controversial.
Well, doctor, thank you for meeting with us today. You've certainly given us a lot of useful information on marijuana and its effects, as well as pathophysiology. Next, we'll be meeting with a lawyer to discuss some of the legalities of medical marijuana usage. We are on location with attorney-at-law Teresa Vandergooch. Teresa has agreed to meet with us today to share with us some of the legalities concerning medical marijuana usage. Teresa, thanks for meeting with us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
So, tell us, why was marijuana outlawed in the first place?
There's a lot of stories that go back and forth about a lot of political power, gossip, We'll just talk about the actual laws that came into play. Interestingly enough, it was a law in the early United States from the 1600s until the late 1800s that farmers were required to grow hemp. Hemp was used as a good textile material for making sails for ships, ropes for ships as well, and it was a big commodity back then. It wasn't until the early 1900s when the government passed the Pure Food and Drug Act, where everything had to be labeled to include exactly all of the ingredients in it. And at this time, you could go to the local drugstore and buy marijuana, actually not called marijuana at that time, but it was cannabis labeled in remedies.
Go.
That's interesting. Please, elaborate.
Well, after that, I think that what happened was there became a lot of fear about immigrants coming in the early 1900s as well. The Mexican War happened, and immigrants started flooding to the United States from Mexico. And at that time, the immigrants were bringing in what was called marijuana. Hemp being the stalks of the sativa plant, and marijuana being the seeds, flowers, and leaves. Up until this time, the United States didn't have the smoking of what was called marijuana at that time. So that was introduced into the United States, and because a lot of immigrants were bringing it in, there became a lot of fear as far as the activities of people that were strange, and so the creation of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics was started in 1930, and that's when the Uniform State Narcotic Act came into effect, and it was linked, silly enough, it was linked to crime because it was associated with the immigrants. It was linked to maniac behavior, which is why it was called loco weed. And so a lot of panic ensued about this new drug that was going to make people turn into maniacs.
So what came out of all the fear?
Well, as a matter of fact, in the late 30s, the government put in a Marijuana Tax Act that didn't outlaw the growing of hemp or medical marijuana, but what it did was it made it very difficult for doctors who were prescribing medical marijuana. You had to buy a tax stamp for a very small amount of money, but there was a tremendous amount of paperwork to file, and so it was easier to not prescribe it. It was a big hassle to go through all the paperwork. And if you didn't have your paperwork exactly right, you were fined thousands of dollars, which was a lot of money back in the 30s. Now, surprisingly enough, in the 40s, during World War II, they started encouraging farmers again to grow hemp for the war effort. They created propaganda called Hemp for Victory, and you didn't have to go fight if you'd stay home and grow hemp again. Now, it didn't become a problem until the counterculture in the 60s, where the kids all started smoking marijuana, and it became a big problem again as far as recreational use.
But what was the parents' response to all of this?
Well, undoubtedly, the parents really raised a ruckus, and it really started coming out into the government that needed to do something about all the recreational use of marijuana. So the parents started filing petitions, and the war on drugs began with the presidencies, each one getting a little stricter. And during this time, medical research was being done on the effects of marijuana, and studies were coming out that it did have very good effects for medical use. However, the presidents would turn down any idea of legalizing it and continue their fight for a war on drugs.
But it's legal now, at least for medical usage. What can you tell us about that?
Well, in 1996, California, surprisingly enough, they were the first to outlaw marijuana as a state because of all the immigrants. They were the first to adopt the medical marijuana in their state. And several states have followed, and Michigan is one of them.
We are in studio with Vamy. Vamy is married, mother of 5, and we're going to find out her stance for marijuana and its medical use purposes. Hello, Vamy. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Vamy, would you mind telling us your stance on marijuana?
Well, I am for medical marijuana. About 5 years ago, my cousin was diagnosed with leukemia, and he was going through chemotherapy and everything, and he wasn't eating, wasn't doing anything, so the doctor said, why don't you try some marijuana, just so it'll help the nausea, and maybe it'll make you want to eat some more, because, you know, you got to eat in order to go through chemo. So he did, and it worked, and he never had his card or anything, but his physician is the one who told him.
Now, this physician, was it an MD?
Yes, it was. I don't know his name. I don't want to know his name because he didn't, you know, he didn't have a card to say you need to try this, but he had recommended it and it worked great. And Mark started eating, got some protein in him, and started helping. It really helped with the chemo. He went into remission for a little while.
So it sounds like in this instance it was very helpful.
Yes, and now my husband had hurt his back about 2 years ago from work, and so he has his medical card, and he uses marijuana about 2 times a day probably, just to alleviate some of that pain. He doesn't have to take any other pills or anything. He just smokes.
And where would someone buy their medical marijuana?
Well, he has this card, and you have to go through a series. You have to have a physician and everything who's able to write you the prescription. And then there is a place I know of here in town that he goes to get his marijuana when he doesn't have any. But he is allowed to grow marijuana. He can grow up to 12 plants. So right now he's in the process of that.
Now, have you or he noticed any adverse effects from smoking the marijuana? Respiratory issues, things like that?
No, I haven't. I'm usually not around him though when he smokes because I have asthma, so I just tend to not be around. But no, he seems fine. He sleeps fine. He doesn't sound like he's choking or anything, so no.
Now, does he always smoke it, or does he ingest it by other means, such as eating it?
No, he always smokes it. I've never seen him eat it. No special brownies.
Indeed. Well, Vamy, thank you so much for sharing your story with us, and we wish your husband the best.
Thank you.
We are here in downtown Grand Rapids to find out some opinions of just passerbys on the street of medical use marijuana. Why, here comes someone now. Excuse me, ma'am. Yes. Hi. We're here finding out opinions of medical use marijuana. How do you feel about legalizing marijuana?
I'm opposed. I don't think it's a good idea.
Really? And why are you opposed?
Well, if you legalize marijuana, I feel like that's just going to lead to recreational use, that people are going to have the mentality that if it's okay to use it for medical reasons, then it's okay to use it, just for recreational use. And, if we have people getting high and driving, we're going to have impaired drivers. If we have people getting high and going to work, there's workplace safety there. I think it just sends a general message that smoking marijuana is okay, and I don't think that our society needs that. We're just not in a good place right now.
Is that even if they have a medical use card?
I think it gets abused. We have a neighbor that's paraplegic, and he uses medical marijuana for chronic pain, but he has friends that come over and you see them smoking on the back patio. So I think there's just not enough regulations in place to make it safe for society so that it's used for what it's designated to be used for instead of being abused.
Well, thank you very much for your view.
Thank you.
I'm Candy Hook. Stay tuned next week when we come back at our new time, 8, 7 Central.